and welcome back to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And I'm Don Frazier.
And we are Article 4.
Yes.
Section 2, Clause 3. And this is about slavery, so it's automatically obsolete, right?
Well, sort of.
Well.
Slavery's obsolete, but the constitutional concept is not.
Okay, so let's read it.
Yeah.
No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due.
This is the beginning of the fugitive slave laws.
Yes.
And the idea was, if I'm a slave in Kentucky and I cross the Ohio River into free territory, am I free?
Am I free?
And the answer is no. As long as the people in Kentucky say, deliver them up.
Again, relationship between the states.
Yeah. That,
full faith and credit.
You may not be a slave in Indiana, even though you cross the Ohio River and there's no slavery there. You're still a slave in Kentucky. And the Kentucky owner is going to hire bounty hunters, slave hunters, and their dogs to run you down. Now then, do the state authorities have to cooperate?
And what he's talking about.
Well, that became a big issue back then.
Okay.
But it's also everything old is new again.
It becomes in a totally different context. And probably not applicable to this, but it raises the question about sanctuary cities. So, in the days when slavery was allowed, did the state authorities have to cooperate? What was the rule?
Well, the fugitive slave laws said they did.
Okay.
And that led to a lot of hard feelings and bickering. And the South wanted a stronger enforcement of the fugitive slave laws. So, what was happening is we have this thing in Article 4 that says slaves are not free just because they run into a free territory. Free soil does not make free men necessarily. And Southerners are going, all right, it says that that's the case. And authorities in Indiana are going, well, come and get them. And abolitionists in Indiana would go to the fugitive slave and say, all right, we know they're coming. We got word from our agents down on the Ohio River that they came across by ferry, and they're looking for you more than likely, so you probably need to hightail it out of here. Mm-hmm. And they're actually assisting slaves to remain fugitives.
Okay.
And as a matter of conscience.
Right. Yeah, so that would be like the Underground Railroad?
Absolutely.
That would be included in that.
Absolutely. Underground Railroad would be a great example of what we're talking about. And so Southerners are going, well, that's violating the Constitution. And they said, well, how? How exactly is this violating the Constitution? I'm not required necessarily to not tell them you're coming.
Mm-hmm. It just says they shall be delivered up, that term, delivered up.
Who's going to do it? Who's required to do it? John Q. Citizen? Patricia Corncob? Churning her butter?
I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't say who's supposed to deliver them.
How was it interpreted in those days?
Well, you ended up having to have an entire body of legislation that said the sheriff will get involved, local authorities will get involved, officers of the state government, especially in enforcement, would have to get involved.
And so it would take state action then?
That's
or
right.
would
And
it be
so
a federal thing?
Well, the federal law said that this is what you guys have to do. You have to cooperate in this venture. And states that were against it just obedezco pero no cumplo. There it is again. I obey, but I don't comply.
So they slow walk it.
They slow walk it. Absolutely. They look at their feet and say, I don't see any fugitive slaves around here. Instead of going down to the wharves where these guys are working as longshoremen, I'm going to go over to Chestnut Hill and just hang out with the gentry. Yeah. And, well, how come you're not returning these slaves to their owners? Well, I was on Chestnut Hill. I didn't see a one.
I would have if I saw
You know,
them,
if I
but
saw
didn't
one,
see 'em.
you know me, I'm a good cop. I'll do what I'm supposed to. Yeah. And so the Southerners are going, look, these guys are essentially being passively aggressive about opposing slavery by not doing what the Constitution says.
Okay.
And so Congress says, fine, we'll do fugitive slave laws. And we'll say, you must most sincerely turn these people over. And the people saw that and said, whatever. Yeah. You can't, it'll be tough for you to prove your case that I did anything but exactly what was expected of me. And so that's kind of what's going on in several instances throughout American history where local authorities did not approve of one thing or the other, so they just kind of ignored it. Now, from a Southern perspective on this particular clause,
Right.
when they saw their fellow citizens, because we just got through talking about, hey, we all recognize everything across all state lines, unless it's something you don't quite approve of. And then you can just kind of set it aside and play dumb. Southerners are going, what about all this full faith and credit stuff that we just read about?
So they insisted that this be in the Constitution.
I guarantee you they put that in there, and then the people that didn't want it in there spent their entire rest of their careers figuring out how to work around it. But, for instance, there was a compromise on the admission of Texas into the United States. And it had to do with what was the western boundary of Texas.
Okay.
Because under the treaties of Velasco, Mexican armies were supposed to withdraw south of the Rio Grande. Historically, that was never the boundary between Texas and Mexico, but because of that treaty, they said, well, the new boundary is the Rio Grande. Well, the Rio Grande's source is in southwestern Colorado. So where's the western boundary? If it's the Rio Grande, then that means eastern New Mexico is the occupied east bank of the Rio Grande, right, according to Texas. And at one time, the Texas legislature, while it was a republic, claimed the western boundary of Texas as the Pacific Ocean.
They did?
So you're actually were born and raised in greater Texas. Yeah, California, man. So what ends up happening when they settle the western boundary of Texas, there's a great compromise. Texas gives up its claims to the western areas, and in exchange, Southerners get a more rigid fugitive slave law.
Okay.
And but the fact that you had to keep building fugitive slave laws tells you that this clause was obnoxious.
Right. And I guess I would see it as part of the compromises that took place. You can't see the Northerners supporting something.
No,
like
heavens no.
This would be the last thing they would want to support, but it's here in the Constitution for a reason.
Correct. Now, it would also apply to indentures.
Yes. The very first words, no person held in service or labor. So it would include.
But the indentured servant system had, by and large, faded.
Right.
So we're really talking about slaves.
Yeah, and of course the 13th Amendment came along and abolished both indentured servitude and slavery. So it's no longer an issue today.
But the concept of ignoring federal law,
yes,
because you don't agree with it,
it plays out today.
It does.
And you
mentioned sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary cities. What you have are communities all across the country that are refusing, their local law enforcement people are refusing to assist immigration agents in turning over to them or letting them know about people that they're holding in custody or have had contact with who are here illegally. And they're simply saying, hey, I'll use San Francisco as an example. San Francisco saying, yeah, if you're here illegally, we're not going to tell.
We're not going to tattle on you. Yeah.
Exactly.
We will prosecute you for driving away from the gas pump without paying for your gas.
Right.
But we're not going to turn you over for federal crimes.
Right. So in one sense, this is no different. The concept that they're doing is no different than what spurred the fugitive slave laws.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah.
And so we think that this is obsolete. We don't need to know anything about fugitive slave laws. Au contraire, because it's the concept that is still current.
Yeah. And then what do you do about it?
And then what do you do about
And
it?
see, the Trump administration, which wants those sanctuary cities to back off, what legal recourse do they have? They're talking about withholding grants that those cities get. They're talking about
And
punishing them different ways.
bringing the immigrants to those cities.
Yeah.
Say, fine, you want them to have immunity? Welcome to your new, to your new neighbors. Yeah, which is an interesting passive-aggressive approach on the part of the federal government. Yeah. But there are so many of these sort of feuds that come about.
Yeah. Yeah, so
even with the full faith and credit stuff.
Yeah. So what we've got, again, I think the lesson here is the past isn't really the past. It just shows up in a totally different kind of circumstance.
But the concepts are still...
Yeah, and the issues are still...
And the issues, absolutely. As Mark Twain said, the past doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes.
And on that thought...
That's our line, and we'll pick it up again in the next line next time.